I never thought my dogs would become the most controversial topic in Pinewood Heights, Arizona, but here I was, standing in front of a furious HOA board being told my two Great Pyrenees had to go. My name is Isaac Dawson, and I had just moved into the supposedly quiet suburban community 6 months ago, completely unaware that my livestock guardian dogs would spark a war that would end with police involvement and several very angry neighbors learning exactly why I had those dogs in the first place. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when I found a bright yellow violation notice taped to my front door. I pulled it off, squinting in the early Arizona sun as I read the formal complaint. Apparently, my dogs, Thor and Luna, were in violation of the community's pet policy. According to the notice, signed by one Patricia Hendricks, HOA president, my dogs exceeded the weight limit for pets in the neighborhood, and multiple residents had complained about their barking. I felt my blood pressure rising as I read the letter. Thor and Luna barely barked except when they sensed something wrong. That was their job. They were bred for thousands of years to guard livestock and property, not to sit inside all day looking pretty. The notice demanded I appear before the HOA board that Thursday evening to discuss the removal of the offending animals. I crumpled the paper in my fist and walked back inside, where Thor, all 120 pounds of white fluff, looked up at me with concerned brown eyes. Luna, slightly smaller at 90 pounds, patted over and pressed her nose against my leg. "They want you two gone," I told them, scratching behind Luna's ears. "Not happening." My wife, Catherine Jensen, came down the stairs in her scrubs, ready for her shift at the hospital. We had kept our separate last names when we got married 2 years ago. She took one look at my face and frowned. "What's wrong?" I handed her the crumpled notice. Catherine read it quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. "Are they serious? The dogs were here when we moved in. We disclosed them on our application. Apparently, Patricia Hendricks has selective memory." Catherine had to leave for work, but she squeezed my hand before heading out. "Don't back down on this, Isaac. Those dogs are family and they keep us safe out here." She was right about that. Our house sat on the edge of the development, backing up to open desert. Pinewood Heights was one of those new communities that had been carved out of the Arizona wilderness about 5 years ago, all pristine lawns and Mediterranean-style homes pushed right up against wild country. When we bought the house, the realtor had mentioned coyotes occasionally wandering through, which was exactly why I wanted Thor and Luna with us. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. I walked into the community center at 7 o'clock sharp, finding about 15 residents already seated in folding chairs, facing a long table where the HOA board sat. Patricia Hendricks occupied the center seat, a woman in her late 40s with severely highlighted blonde hair and the kind of tight smile that never reached her eyes. She wore a cream blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. To her left sat Vincent Morrison, the vice president, a balding man in his 60s who kept checking his phone. To her right was Sandra Lee, the treasurer, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Mr. Dawson," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "thank you for joining us this evening. I trust you received our notice regarding your animals." "I did," I said, taking a seat in the front row, "and I want to clarify that my dogs aren't just pets. They're working livestock guardian dogs, and they were fully disclosed when we moved in." Patricia's smile tightened. "According to our pet policy, which was updated 4 months ago, no dog over 50 pounds is permitted in Pinewood Heights. Your animals significantly exceed that limit." "Updated 4 months ago? That's 2 months after we moved in." I pulled out my own copy of the original HOA documents from my bag. The covenant I signed when purchasing my home stated dogs under 150 pounds were acceptable as long as they were properly contained. "The board has the right to amend policies as needed for the safety and comfort of all residents," Vincent chimed in, finally looking up from his phone. "We've had multiple complaints about barking and intimidating behavior from your dogs." "From who?" I challenged. "I want names and dates. My dogs are behind a 6-foot fence and only bark when there's an actual threat." A woman in the third row raised her hand tentatively. "I recognized her as Deborah Walsh, who lived 3 houses down from me." "I complained once," she admitted, "but only because they barked at 2 in the morning last week." "That's because there were coyotes in your yard," I said, turning to face her. "I saw them on my security camera. Thor and Luna were doing exactly what they're supposed to do, warning off predators. Did you know there were coyotes that close to your house? Deborah's eyes widened. No, I didn't see any coyotes. That's because my dogs scared them off before they could get any closer. I turned back to Patricia. Look, I understand if people aren't familiar with guardian dogs, but they're not aggressive. They're protective. There's a difference. They've never threatened anyone, never gotten loose, never caused any actual problems. Patricia folded her hands on the table. Mr. Dawson, I'm sure you believe your dogs are harmless, but the fact remains that they're in violation of our current policy. The board has voted, and you have 30 days to remove them from the property or face daily fines of $250. You can't be serious. I assure you, we're quite serious. These policies exist to maintain property values and ensure a safe, pleasant environment for all residents. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. You're putting this entire community at risk by removing the only active predator deterrent in the neighborhood. Those coyotes Deborah heard? They're getting bolder. They've figured out this subdivision is easy pickings because nobody has any real protection. I think you're being dramatic, Patricia said dismissively. Coyotes are a minor nuisance at worst. They're not going to attack people. Tell that to the family in Phoenix whose 5-year-old was mauled last year. I shot back. Or the woman in Scottsdale who lost her cat right off her own porch. These aren't the scared, scrawny coyotes of the past. They're well-fed, comfortable around humans, and they're pack hunters. Sandra Lee spoke up for the first time. Mr. Dawson, perhaps we could discuss a compromise? Maybe if you kept the dogs inside during certain hours? They're guardian dogs. They need to be outside to do their job. That's the entire point. I took a breath, trying to calm down. Look, I'm willing to work with you here. I'll make sure they're not barking unnecessarily. I'll even invite anyone who's concerned to come meet them and see that they're gentle animals. But I'm not getting rid of my dogs. Patricia's fake smile disappeared entirely. Then you'll be fined. The decision is final. You have 30 days. I left the meeting furious and frustrated. When I got home, Catherine was waiting up for me. I told her everything that had happened, and she was just as angry as I was. We need to fight this, she said firmly. There has to be something in our original contract that protects us. Over the next week, I consulted with a real estate attorney named Marcus Brennan. He reviewed all my documents and gave me news I didn't want to hear. Unfortunately, Marcus said during our phone call, the HOA covenant includes a clause allowing the board to amend pet policies with a majority vote and 30 days notice to residents. That notice you mentioned from 4 months ago? They sent out a mass email about the policy change. Did you receive it? I thought back, scrolling through my email. Sure enough, buried in my spam folder was an email from the Pinewood Heights HOA dated 4 months prior. I never saw it. It went to spam. That might not matter legally. They can argue they made a good faith effort to notify residents. However, you might have a case if you can prove selective enforcement or that the policy change was specifically targeted at you. How would I prove that? You'd need to document other violations they're ignoring. Are there other dogs over 50 pounds in the neighborhood? I started paying attention. Over the next few days, I drove through Pinewood Heights with my phone, carefully documenting what I saw. Sure enough, I found at least 6 other dogs that appeared to exceed the 50-pound limit, including a golden retriever that had to be at least 80 pounds and a German shepherd that was definitely over the limit. I compiled my evidence and submitted a formal appeal to the HOA board, requesting another hearing. Patricia responded via email, denying my appeal and informing me that I now had 3 weeks left to comply. She didn't address any of my evidence of selective enforcement. The following Tuesday, I came home from work to find Thor limping. I immediately checked him over and found a small cut on his paw pad, nothing serious but concerning. What really worried me was what I found in my backyard afterward, a pile of fresh coyote scat not 5 feet from my back fence. I checked my security cameras and saw what had happened. Around 3 a.m, a pack of 5 coyotes had approached my fence line. Thor and Luna had rushed over, barking and posturing aggressively. The coyotes had retreated but not far. They had circled around, testing different areas of the fence. Thor had cut his paw on something while patrolling the fence line. I downloaded the footage and emailed it to Patricia Hendricks with a clear message. This is what my dogs are protecting against. These coyotes are getting bolder, and they're scouting the neighborhood. Without guardian dogs as a deterrent, they will move in closer. Please reconsider your position." Her response came 2 hours later. "Mr. Dawson, your scare tactics are unnecessary and unwelcome. You have 19 days to comply with the pet policy. No further extensions will be granted." I was running out of options and time. Catherine and I discussed our choices every night. We could move, but we loved our house and had invested everything into it. We could rehome Thor and Luna, which wasn't happening as far as I was concerned. Or we could stay and fight and potentially lose thousands in fines. "What if we just paid the fines?" Catherine asked one night. $250 a day is expensive, but maybe we could handle it for a while until we figure something out. "That's $7,500 a month, Catherine. We can't afford that." She slumped against the couch. "I know. I just don't want to lose them." 2 weeks before my deadline, things escalated. I received a formal letter from the HOA's attorney threatening legal action if I didn't comply. They could place a lien on my property and eventually force a sale to recover their fines. At the same time, I noticed increased coyote activity on my cameras. They were coming closer every night, and the packs were getting larger. I tried one more time to reason with the community. I printed flyers with screenshots from my security footage showing the coyotes and information about guardian dogs. I included facts about increasing coyote boldness in suburban Arizona and statistics about pet and child attacks. I went door to door, talking to anyone who would listen. Some neighbors were sympathetic. Deborah Walsh apologized for complaining and said she supported me keeping my dogs. A younger couple, Mark and Jennifer Peterson, who had just moved in with their twin toddlers, were especially concerned about the coyote activity. But others refused to even answer their doors, and a few told me bluntly that they trusted Patricia's judgment over mine. 1 week before the deadline, I woke up to chaos. It was just after dawn, and I heard screaming outside. I rushed out my front door to find my neighbor across the street, Helen Garcia, standing in her driveway sobbing. Her small dog, a Maltese named Snowball, was gone. Blood was smeared across her driveway. "They took him!" she wailed as other neighbors emerged from their houses. "The coyotes just grabbed him right off my porch. I let him out like I always do, and they were just there, waiting." I felt sick. "Did you see how many?" 3 of them. They worked together. One distracted him while another grabbed him, and they just ran off into the desert. Patricia Hendricks arrived 20 minutes later. Apparently someone had called her. She stood in Helen's driveway, looking uncomfortable but defensive as Helen sobbed against another neighbor's shoulder. "This is exactly what I warned you about," I said, approaching Patricia. "This is what guardian dogs prevent." "One incident doesn't prove anything," Patricia snapped. "This could have happened anywhere. It happened here because you removed the deterrent. My dogs create a perimeter that makes coyotes think twice about entering the neighborhood. Without them, the coyotes know this is easy hunting." "Your dogs aren't the solution to every problem, Mr. Dawson." Helen looked up, her face red and streaked with tears. "Maybe they should have listened to you, Isaac. I'm so sorry I didn't say something at that meeting. I thought Patricia knew what she was doing." Over the next 3 days, the neighborhood descended into fear. Another small dog went missing from a yard 4 houses down. Then, someone's cat disappeared. Parents stopped letting their children play outside. The community Facebook page exploded with worried posts and grainy security footage of coyotes prowling through yards in broad daylight. And through it all, Patricia Hendricks remained stubbornly opposed to reversing the dog policy. She sent out an email suggesting residents keep small pets indoors and avoid leaving food outside. She mentioned hiring a wildlife removal service, but nothing materialized. My deadline arrived on a Wednesday. That morning, I found a notice on my door informing me that I was now subject to daily fines of $250 until I removed my dogs. I stood there staring at the paper, feeling helpless and furious. That afternoon, I got a call from Catherine at work. "Isaac, have you seen the neighborhood page? There's been an attack." I pulled up Facebook with shaking hands. The top post was from Jennifer Peterson, and it made my blood run cold. She had been in her backyard with her twin 3-year-old daughters that morning. They were playing in their sandbox when 3 coyotes came through the fence line. Jennifer had grabbed both girls and run inside, but one of the coyotes had chased them, getting close enough that Jennifer had to kick at it before getting the door closed. She had posted photos of muddy coyote paw prints on her back patio and scratch marks on her doorframe. Her post was panicked and angry. "Where is the HOA on this? Our children are being threatened by coyotes, and we're told to just keep them inside. We bought homes here so they could play safely in our own yards. This is unacceptable." The comment section was exploding. At least 30 people had chimed in with their own coyote sightings and concerns. Several people mentioned my dogs and asked why I'd been forced to remove the only effective deterrent in the neighborhood. Patricia tried to do damage control, posting a long response about contacting wildlife services and implementing new safety protocols. But people were done listening to her. The comments on her post were brutal. That evening, I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mark Peterson standing there, looking exhausted and worried. "Isaac, I wanted to apologize. I signed that petition Patricia passed around supporting the new pet policy. I didn't understand what your dogs actually did. After what happened today with Jennifer and the girls, I get it now. Is there anything I can do to help?" "Contact the other board members," I said. "Patricia isn't going to change her mind, but maybe Sandra and Vincent can be convinced to call an emergency vote." Mark nodded. "I'll talk to everyone I know. This has gone too far." Over the next 2 days, a petition circulated throughout Pinewood Heights, demanding an emergency HOA meeting to address the coyote problem and reconsider the pet policy. More than 70 homeowners signed it, nearly half the community. Patricia tried to delay, but Vincent Morrison finally grew a spine and called for an emergency board meeting that Saturday. The community center was packed when I arrived. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. The energy in the room was tense and angry. Patricia sat at the head table looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Vincent and Sandra flanked her, both looking uncomfortable. Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice tight. "We're here to discuss community concerns about wildlife management," she began. "I want to assure everyone that the board takes these issues seriously and we're actively working on solutions." "Then why did you force Isaac to get rid of his guardian dogs?" someone shouted from the back. I recognized the voice as belonging to Deborah Walsh. "The pet policy was enacted for valid reasons," Patricia said defensively. "Large dogs can be intimidating and dangerous." "More dangerous than coyotes attacking our kids?" Jennifer Peterson stood up, holding her phone. "I have video of those coyotes from my security camera. Do you want to see how close they got to my daughters?" The room erupted in agreement. People were shouting over each other, demanding answers. Patricia tried to regain control, but she had lost the room. Finally, Vincent Morrison stood up. "Enough. Patricia, we need to address this properly. I move that we hold an immediate vote to suspend the pet weight restriction for documented livestock guardian dogs and allow Mr. Dawson to keep his animals." "I second that motion," Sandra Lee said quickly. Patricia's face went red. "You can't just override board policy." "Yes, we can," Vincent said firmly. "That's how board votes work. All in favor?" Vincent and Sandra raised their hands. Patricia sat frozen, her mouth tight. "Motion passes 2-1, Vincent announced. "Mr. Dawson, your dogs are no longer in violation. The fines are rescinded." The room burst into applause. I felt relief wash over me so strongly I had to sit down. People came up to shake my hand and apologize for not supporting me sooner. But Patricia wasn't done. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. "Fine. If this is how this board operates, you can find a new president. I resign, effective immediately." She stormed out of the community center. Honestly, nobody seemed particularly upset to see her go. Sandra Lee took over the rest of the meeting, and the board discussed hiring a professional wildlife management company to assess the coyote situation and provide recommendations. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I was working from home when I heard Thor and Luna barking urgently. I ran outside to find both dogs at the back fence, hackles raised. On my security monitor, I could see what they saw. Patricia Hendricks was in the open desert area behind my property, and she appeared to be putting out food. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I walked around to confront her. "Patricia, what are you doing?" She spun around, caught. "I'm on public land. I can be here if I want." You're putting out food. You're baiting the coyotes." I zoomed in with my phone camera, capturing clear footage of several bowls filled with what looked like dog food and chicken pieces. "Don't be ridiculous. This is illegal in Arizona. You're actively attracting dangerous wildlife to a residential area." My mind was reeling. "Oh my God, you've been doing this all along, haven't you? That's why the coyote activity increased so much. You've been feeding them to make the problem worse." Patricia's face went pale, then flushed red. "You can't prove anything. I have you on video right now, and I'm betting if I go back through my security footage from the past few months, I'll find more evidence." I kept my phone trained on her. "Why would you do this? People could have been hurt. Animals died." "Because nobody takes me seriously anymore," she burst out. "I've been president of this board for 4 years, and everyone just undermines me constantly. Those dogs were a nuisance, and I tried to handle it properly, but everyone acted like I was the villain. I just wanted to prove that I was right about the dangers." "So you created the danger yourself, Patricia? That's insane. Helen Garcia's dog died. Jennifer Peterson's children were threatened. All because you wanted to be right?" She seemed to realize what she had just admitted. "Delete that video." "Not a chance." I backed away. "Stay away from my property and stay away from this area. I'm reporting this to animal control and the police." "You wouldn't dare." "Watch me." I went straight inside and called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation and sent them my video footage. They took it seriously enough to send an officer out within the hour. Officer Travis McKenzie was a solid guy in his 30s who listened carefully as I showed him the video and explained the timeline of events. Patricia had apparently fled as soon as I went inside, but the bowls of food were still there as evidence. "We'll need to investigate further," Officer McKenzie said. "But if what you're telling me is accurate, she could face charges for illegal wildlife feeding and potentially reckless endangerment. Arizona takes wildlife interaction very seriously, especially in residential areas." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Animal control investigated and found evidence that food had been regularly placed in that area for at least 2 months, matching the timeline of increased coyote activity. They also found that Patricia had been placing food in several other locations around the neighborhood's perimeter. The police investigation revealed that Patricia had been documenting the coyote activity herself, keeping a journal that detailed her efforts to prove the danger level doesn't require large dogs. The journal entries made it clear she had understood she was attracting the coyotes and had intended to use the resulting problems to justify her pet policy stance. When Helen Garcia learned that Patricia's actions had directly led to her dog's death, she filed a civil lawsuit. Jennifer and Mark Peterson followed suit, citing emotional distress and endangerment of their children. 2 other families who had lost pets joined in. The criminal charges came down in March. Patricia Hendricks was charged with illegal wildlife feeding, reckless endangerment, and criminal nuisance. She tried to fight it, hiring an expensive attorney, but the evidence was overwhelming. The video I had captured, combined with her journal and the animal control investigation, painted a clear picture of someone who had knowingly endangered her community to prove a point. In May, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to the families who had lost pets. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The civil lawsuits were settled out of court. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia's insurance covered most of it, but she and her husband decided to sell their house and move out of Pinewood Heights. Nobody was sad to see them go. The coyote problem didn't magically disappear, but it got significantly better once they stopped being artificially attracted to the area. The HOA hired a wildlife management company that implemented proper deterrent measures, including motion-activated lights and sound devices at key points around the neighborhood perimeter. Combined with Thor and Luna's presence, the Coyotes learned to give Pinewood Heights a wide berth. Vincent Morrison took over as HOA president and immediately worked to revise several of the more ridiculous policies Patricia had pushed through. The pet policy was completely rewritten to focus on behavior and safety rather than arbitrary weight limits. Several other families in the neighborhood actually got guardian dogs after seeing how effective Thor and Luna were. Helen Garcia got a new dog, a rescue terrier mix named Scout. She brought him over to meet Thor and Luna, and I gave her some tips on basic predator safety. She was still sad about Snowball, but Scout was helping her heal. The Petersons became good friends. Mark and I started having regular barbecues, and their daughters loved visiting Thor and Luna. The dogs were gentle giants with the girls, letting them climb all over them while maintaining their vigilant watch over the yard. Catherine and I finally felt like we could breathe again. One evening in June, we sat on our back patio watching the sun set over the desert. Thor and Luna lounged nearby, relaxed but alert as always. "Can you believe everything that happened?" Catherine said, leaning against my shoulder. "Sometimes I still can't believe Patricia actually fed the coyotes just to prove she was right about the dogs," I said. "That's a level of stubborn I hope I never reach. You saved this neighborhood, you know. If you had given in and gotten rid of Thor and Luna, who knows what would have happened." "I just did what made sense. These dogs are part of our family and they do important work. I wasn't going to abandon them because someone didn't understand that." Thor lifted his massive head and looked at me, his brown eyes warm and trusting. Luna yawned and stretched, then resumed her scan of the property line. They were doing what they had been bred to do for thousands of years, protecting their territory and their people. The lawsuit settlements meant Helen, the Petersons, and the other families received compensation, but more importantly, it sent a message that HOA boards couldn't just abuse their power without consequences. The case actually made local news, and I heard it prompted other communities to review their own pet policies and HOA oversight procedures. Life in Pinewood Heights settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new HOA board was responsive and reasonable. Neighbors who had previously been indifferent now waved and stopped to chat. Several people thanked me for standing my ground and protecting the community, even when it would have been easier to give in. Thor and Luna continued their nightly patrols, their presence alone enough to keep the coyotes at a respectful distance. Occasionally, I'd catch them on the security cameras, alerting to movement in the desert, but the coyotes never came close anymore. They had learned that Pinewood Heights was protected territory. Looking back, I realized the whole situation had taught me something important about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. It would have been so much easier to just rehome the dogs, pay the fines, or move away. But sometimes the right choice is the hard one, and sometimes standing your ground means protecting not just yourself, but everyone around you. Patricia had tried to use fear and authority to get her way, but she had forgotten that HOAs are supposed to serve their communities, not rule them. Her downfall wasn't just about the dogs or the coyotes. It was about someone who cared more about being right and maintaining control than about actually doing what was best for the people she was supposed to serve. In the end, justice prevailed. The community came together, and Thor and Luna got to keep doing what they do best, being excellent guard dogs and even better family members. Our house on the edge of the desert felt more like home than ever, and I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. The experience also connected me with other guardian dog owners in Arizona. I joined a couple of Facebook groups and online forums where people shared tips and stories about their livestock guardian dogs. It was validating to talk to others who understood what these dogs meant and what they could do. Some of these people raised actual livestock, but plenty were like me, using the dogs to protect their families in areas where suburban development met wild country. I even started volunteering with a local organization that educated communities about coexistence with wildlife. I shared my story as a case study in what happens when people don't understand the tools available for managing human-wildlife interactions. The organization used our situation as an example of both what not to do, Patricia's illegal feeding, and what works, proper guardian animals and deterrent measures. Catherine took a particular interest in the educational side of things. She started giving presentations at community centers and schools about wildlife safety. She had a gift for explaining things in ways that didn't scare people, but helped them understand the reality of living in areas where human development encroached on wildlife habitat. Thor and Luna occasionally came along for demonstrations, much to the delight of kids who got to see these massive, gentle dogs up close. As summer approached, bringing the intense Arizona heat, life continued peacefully. The neighborhood kids had started a tradition of visiting Thor and Luna on their evening walks. The dogs had become minor celebrities in Pinewood Heights, with everyone knowing their names and their story. One evening in late July, I was watering the front yard when a car pulled up. A family I didn't recognize got out, and the father approached me hesitantly. "Are you Isaac Dawson?" he asked. "That's me. My name is Robert Chen. My family and I are considering buying a house here in Pinewood Heights. We have 2 young kids, and we're concerned about safety. Our realtor mentioned your dogs and what happened with the previous HOA president. Would you mind talking to us about it?" I spent the next 30 minutes telling the Chens the whole story. They listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about the current HOA board, the wildlife situation, and the community's approach to safety. By the end of our conversation, they seemed satisfied. "Thank you for being honest with us," Robert said. "It actually makes us feel better knowing the community dealt with that problem decisively and that there are people like you here who care about keeping everyone safe." They bought the house 2 weeks later and moved in at the end of August. Their kids, a 6-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, immediately fell in love with Thor and Luna. It became routine to see them stop by our fence on their way home from school to say hello to the dogs. September brought cooler temperatures and the start of a new school year. The neighborhood settled into autumn routines. Halloween decorations started appearing on lawns, and the HOA organized a community trick-or-treating event. Vincent Morrison made a point of including Thor and Luna in the planning, suggesting we set up a booth where kids could meet the dogs and learn about guardian breeds. It was a huge hit, with lines of children waiting to pet the gentle giants and hear their story. In October, I received an unexpected call from a reporter at the Phoenix Chronicle. She was doing a feature story on HOA reform following several high-profile cases of board abuse around the state. She had heard about our situation and wanted to interview me. The article ran in November and caused quite a stir. It detailed not just our case, but several others where HOA boards had overstepped their authority, and it called for better oversight and accountability measures. Our story was featured prominently, including quotes from me, Catherine, and several neighbors. Patricia's name was mentioned along with the outcome of her criminal case. The article prompted state legislators to propose new laws requiring better transparency and oversight for HOA boards in Arizona. While the legislation would take time to work through the system, it was satisfying to know that our experience might help prevent similar situations in other communities. Through all of this, Thor and Luna remained blissfully unaware of their fame. They continued their daily routines, patrolling the yard, lounging in the shade during hot afternoons, and alerting to any potential threats. They were just doing what came naturally to them, but their presence had fundamentally changed our community for the better. By December, as the holidays approached, Pinewood Heights felt like a completely different place than it had a year earlier. The community was closer, more engaged, and more aware of the importance of responsible leadership. The new HOA board held regular town halls where residents could voice concerns and ask questions. Policies were reviewed and debated openly rather than being handed down by decree. On Christmas Eve, Catherine and I hosted a neighborhood party. Our house was filled with friends and neighbors, including Helen Garcia with Scout, the Petersons with their twins, the Chens, Deborah Walsh, and at least 20 other families. Thor and Luna held court in the backyard, accepting pets and treats from a steady stream of admirers. Vincent Morrison pulled me aside at one point during the evening. "You know, Isaac, I owe you an apology. I should have stood up to Patricia much sooner. I let her push through policies I knew were wrong because it was easier than fighting her. You showed me what real courage looks like." "I appreciate that, Vincent, but I think we all learned something from this situation. You stepped up when it mattered most, and you've been a great president since. Still, I wanted you to know that I'm working on establishing better checks and balances for the board. We're implementing term limits, requiring community votes on major policy changes, and creating an ombudsman position to handle disputes. I don't want another Patricia Hendricks to ever have that much unchecked power again." As the evening wound down and guests started heading home, I stood in my backyard with Catherine, watching Thor and Luna settle down for the night. The dogs looked content, their white coats almost glowing in the moonlight. "We made it," Catherine said softly. "I really wasn't sure we would for a while there." "I never doubted it," I lied. She laughed, knowing full well there had been plenty of moments when I had been terrified we would lose everything. "Liar, but I love you anyway." We went inside, leaving Thor and Luna to their nightly vigil. Through the window, I could see them lying in their favorite spots, positioned so they could watch all approaches to the house. They were alert even in rest, always ready to warn off any threat. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke to fresh snow. It was rare for Pinewood Heights to get snow, but the weather had turned cold overnight, and a light dusting covered everything. Thor and Luna were having the time of their lives, playing in the white stuff like puppies. Their breed was built for cold weather, and they looked more at home in the snow than they ever did in the Arizona heat. I went outside to join them, and they bounded over, coating me in snow and dog hair. It was ridiculous and perfect, and I found myself laughing harder than I had in months. This was what I had fought for, the right to keep my family together, to protect my home, and to stand up for what I knew was right. In the year since the confrontation with Patricia had begun, so much had changed. Our community was stronger, our laws were better, and people had learned valuable lessons about accountability and the importance of evidence-based decision-making. But the most important thing hadn't changed at all. Thor and Luna were still here, still protecting us, still being the amazing dogs they had always been. As spring arrived again, bringing temperatures back up and desert flowers blooming across the landscape, I reflected on everything that had happened. The whole experience had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also been transformative. I had discovered strength I didn't know I had, and it helped my community come together in ways that would last for years. The lawsuit settlements had been finalized, with all parties receiving fair compensation. Patricia and her husband had moved to Nevada, and I heard they were keeping a very low profile. The criminal case had set a precedent that was being cited in other wildlife-related cases across Arizona. Thor and Luna were now 7 and 6 years old respectively, entering their prime years as guardian dogs. They had settled into their roles perfectly, and the neighborhood had benefited immensely from their presence. No one complained about barking anymore. In fact, people commented that they slept better knowing the dogs were on patrol. The coyote population in the area had stabilized at a reasonable level. They were still present in the desert, as they should be, but they had learned to avoid Pinewood Heights. Occasionally, young coyotes would test the boundaries, but Thor and Luna quickly reminded them why this particular subdivision was off limits. Other wildlife had also adjusted to the new normal. Javelinas, rabbits, and even the occasional bobcat moved through the area, but they all gave our neighborhood a wide berth. The guardian dogs had established a clear territory, and the local wildlife respected it. Life had found its balance. The HOA functioned smoothly under Vincent's leadership, with Sandra Lee as vice president and a new treasurer named Michael Ross, who was meticulous about finances and transparency. The board held quarterly town halls, and residents felt heard and represented. Property values in Pinewood Heights had actually increased following the resolution of the coyote problem and the HOA reforms. Real estate agents were using our community as an example of successful wildlife management in desert developments. The presence of guardian dogs had become a selling point rather than a liability. In May, a year after Patricia's sentencing, the Arizona legislature passed the HOA Reform Act, which included many of the oversight measures Vincent had implemented in Pinewood Heights. The law required HOA boards to maintain transparency, allowed homeowners to petition for policy reviews, and established clear procedures for dispute resolution. Several legislators specifically mentioned our case as inspiration for the reforms. Catherine and I attended the signing ceremony at the state capitol. It was surreal to see our personal struggle become part of state law that would protect thousands of other homeowners. The governor even mentioned Thor and Luna by name in her remarks, calling them unlikely heroes in the fight for HOA accountability. As summer approached again, I couldn't help but think about how different things were compared to just 2 years ago. We had moved to Pinewood Heights looking for a quiet place to build our life together. Instead, we had found ourselves at the center of a community crisis that had tested everything we believed in. But we had also found something unexpected: a real home. Not just a house or a neighborhood, but a community of people who had come together in a crisis and emerged stronger for it. We had neighbors who were genuine friends, a HOA board that actually served its members, and a safer environment for everyone. Thor and Luna had been the catalyst for all of it. but they remained gloriously unconcerned with their legacy. They were content to patrol the yard, accept treats from the neighborhood kids, and occasionally bark at a rabbit that ventured too close. They were just being dogs, doing what dogs have done for thousands of years. On a warm evening in June, I sat on the back patio with Catherine, watching the sunset over the desert. Thor was sprawled at my feet and Luna was making her evening rounds of the fence line. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, and the air was finally cooling after another scorching day. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had just given in?" Catherine asked. "If we had rehomed them when Patricia first demanded it?" I thought about it seriously. Honestly, I think the coyote problem would have gotten much worse. Without Thor and Luna as a deterrent, and with Patricia actively feeding them, someone probably would have been seriously hurt. A child, most likely. So you saved lives. The dogs saved lives. I just refused to get rid of them. That's more than most people would have done. You risked everything to stand up for what was right. We risked everything, I corrected. You were with me every step of the way. She smiled and took my hand. I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Thor and Luna settled into their nighttime positions. The soft glow of landscape lighting illuminated the yard, and I could see both dogs clearly as they rested but remained alert. Their white coats seemed to glow in the dim light, making them look almost ethereal. From somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was far away, much farther than they used to come. Luna lifted her head and let out a single deep bark in response. The message was clear. This territory is protected. The howling moved even farther away and then stopped. I smiled. The system was working exactly as it should. The coyotes had their space, we had ours, and guardian dogs maintained the boundary. It was an ancient arrangement, one that had worked for millennia before HOA boards and suburban developments existed. Patricia had tried to impose her will on the natural order, and it had backfired spectacularly. As June turned to July and we approached the 2-year anniversary of moving to Pinewood Heights, I realized I had everything I had ever wanted. A home I loved, a wife I adored, a community I was proud to be part of, and 2 incredible dogs who made it all possible. The story of Thor, Luna, and the Pinewood Heights HOA battle had become something of a local legend. New residents heard about it when they moved in, and it had become part of the community's identity. People were proud of how they had handled the crisis, proud of the reforms they had implemented, and proud of the precedent they had set. For my part, I was just grateful. Grateful that I had stood my ground, grateful for Catherine's unwavering support, grateful for neighbors who eventually stood with us, and grateful for 2 amazing dogs who had done nothing more complicated than be themselves. Sometimes being yourself is enough to change the world, or at least one small corner of it in Arizona. As I locked up the house for the night and gave Thor and Luna their final treats before bed, I reflected on the simple truth that had guided me through the entire ordeal. Family is worth fighting for, whether that family walks on 2 legs or 4. The moment you compromise on that principle is the moment you lose something essential about who you are. Patricia had forgotten that principle, if she ever knew it. She had cared more about control and being right than about the well-being of her community. That short-sightedness had cost her everything, her position, her reputation, and ultimately her home. Meanwhile, I still had mine, along with 2 dogs who would protect it until their last breath. The night was quiet as I finally headed to bed. Through the window, I could see Thor and Luna on their usual patrol. They were doing what they had always done, what they would always do. They were guardians, protectors, and ultimately the heroes of a story they didn't even know they were part of, and that was exactly how it should be.